We've got a couple of resumes here. We're going to critique and have a look at what they're doing well and what they can do to improve. One is a design resume, while the other one is more a development one. My name is Adrian, and I do stuff around design and development. So if you like this kind of content and you want to see more like it, hit like and subscribe, and let's just jump right into it. Here, we have a really cool resume by Wildly Unpopular. This was posted online as a request for review, and we're going to take a look at it and see what we can see that they're doing really well, as well as things that they can improve on. So, from this get-go, we can see that their resume actually does look really good. It seems very clear and consistent, and as far as a resume goes, it's only a single page, and yet on this single page, we have all their contact information, a short introduction, as well as their experience. We also have what their skills are, their talents, and a bit more about their education as well. And when I take a look at this, I'm pretty impressed. If I saw this, I would definitely want to read this kind of a resume. But if I'm applying someone for a position for UX or UI, I'll probably dig a little deeper onto how they've structured their resume. So in this case, I can see that they've had really consistent header titles here for each one of their sections. They all have a consistent font and size. Their secondary font here for their job positions is actually not the same size as their subtitles on the right column. So that's something I would definitely take a look at so that those two can be consistent. The next part is this section here for the introduction. If we take a look at it, the columns don't actually in line with anything specific. So the second thing I would recommend is probably expanding these out to fit with the header design or narrowing them a little bit so that they fit in with the rest of the columns that we have here. And in this section, I would probably expand them out either a little bit or a little bit more just to be in line with one column or another. In terms of the header, we can see that we've got a nice strong background with a very thick font for the title, as well as some information for the contact here. Now the contact information does have a gradient, and I suppose it's meant to look cool, but because of the contrast ratio, it's not standing out as much as it could be. And personally, if I was looking at this, keeping to the consistency of the design of just being dark and white, I would probably keep the right section here as a white color rather than having this gradient, because this gradient isn't actually used anywhere else for this design. The second thing is this actual box doesn't actually match anything in the design besides the experience boxes, which are actually tags. We see that all the other headers and sections are just large versions of text and they don't have any backgrounds. So to keep things consistent, I would actually remove this background color and change this text to be black, just so that it's a bit more consistent with the rest of the design. I think that would make it stand out a little bit more. In terms of the layout itself, I really like how the experience section is done. We can see all the different job positions, and it feels like I get a general feel of how long the person's been in each position based on how long the description is for that, as well as the nice dates here. They really give a visual representation of how long each one of those job positions has been filled in for. If we take a look at the positioning for this, we can see that straight after the introduction, we take a look at the experience section. Now, when I'm reading a resume, after reading the introduction, I would normally want to have a look at the skills someone has. So this is actually hidden all the way at the bottom right here, and it's in the column here. What I would recommend is actually moving this all the way to the top, maybe even all the way to the left here as its own little column, because that way I get straight away an idea of what kind of skills this person has. Then I would follow that up with the actual experience section so that I can get more information about this person if they had the skills that I require. We can take a look here, and we have the education section, which is secondary. Now, personally, I would put this after the experience section because I suppose it would be the very last thing that they've done back in 2014. So this isn't as useful to me as it could be. So I would definitely move it all the way down here. Finally, we have the skills and talents. And this section is very generic. In terms of the wording and the descriptions, I feel like there can be a better communication on what these actually are. When I look at these and see something like wireframing and prototyping, it's something I would expect if someone's working with Sketch. So I would much prefer if someone gave me a use case example of something they've done that shows that skill. Maybe some links to a portfolio or something that shows me those key skills and talents. Otherwise, this resume has been really good and I've been pretty happy to have a look at this. I hope that more people can do really nice looking resumes like this in the future. Here we have our second resume and this looks really good, but it does look like it's a very condensed version of what it could be over 2 pages. So my very first recommendation before I even get into this is to probably span this over 2 pages rather than a single page, because it feels like it's almost being squashed in. Now, if we take a look at this from the top, we can see here that we've got a QR code. And for this QR code, I assume this would be going to their portfolio or their website. But in a lot of cases, when I'm looking through resumes, I don't really have the time to have a look at a website. So I would probably take this out simply because I wouldn't say it has much of a use case. The next section here I can see is a section that has plus 5 years here and plus 10 years at the bottom. And this is a little bit confusing for me. I'm not too sure exactly what is 5 years plus and what is 10 years plus. So I would go with just the 10 years plus and remove the 5 years plus here, just so it's a bit more clear that you have 10 years of experience. Whether it's all over the place or whether it's only in full stack, I don't think is as important as the fact that you've been working in the field for that long. Now we can see here that you've got creative technologist and IT enthusiast. So I assume to be that you're applying for a developer position as a full stack web developer. But by being a creative, you're telling me that maybe you're working in design, and by being IT enthusiast, you're telling me that maybe you're doing info tech, and those two aren't really related to web development per se. So I would probably have this something different, maybe something saying that I like programming and learning new web technologies or something like that. The next section here talks about a little bit of a summary of what you've worked in. It says that you've worked in front end, back end, PHP, JavaScript, and you've bolted a lot of these frameworks. And because there are so many bolds all over the place, my eyes almost skip past all of the text and just read the keywords here. And while that's useful, it sort of draws me away from learning a little bit about yourself. I would prefer if this section was added here below, which you already sort of have done, with a more better summary about yourself rather than the things you've worked in, which is already shown in the next sections. Now, I've noticed that it's a very big trend to have these dotted experience blocks of what you work in. But I have to say that in my experience, I don't really think they're as meaningful as they visually come across. A lot of the times people just want to know if you've worked in a certain technology stack, and whether you have or haven't is probably as far as you need to go until you actually have a conversation with the people. So by having Angular only 3 stars here, it's drawing you away from possibly having an Angular job where someone else might put 5 stars just for everything. Or even someone who might not put any stars in, and you would assume that they're working in Angular. Another thing is there is a little bit of no consistency between what each one of these sections are. So for example, PHP and JavaScript are sort of languages, whereas WordPress is sort of a a framework that's pre-made, ready to go. And here backend, front end, and admin sort of backend and Linux admin sort of cross over. So it's not, again, as useful having those two next to each other. Web security, web optimization, and Angular. Again, these 3 don't really fit in together. Angular is sort of a library that should probably go across to the left section. And while web security and website optimization is really good, I would much prefer if this was something about actual security frameworks you've done, sort of say JSON tokens or, for example, Auth0. They would tell me a lot more about what you're doing in terms of security. If we take a look at the next section, we've got PHP, JavaScript, CSS in here, but you've already put in a skill as PHP, and now you've got a technology as PHP. This overlap is a little bit confusing, and I would say that you only have one in one section rather than redundantly repeating yourself in these sections. Again, you have Angular and Angular here, so that's another example of that. The rest of those are pretty good. I believe it would be more useful if you could group them, for example, into stuff like here we have Photoshop and GIMP, which is good, but they're next to Apache and Git, which sort of are two different types of things. Here you've got Bootstrap and Google Cloud, which is sort of two different things again next to each other, and they should be segregated into better sections so that you know that one is talking about cloud computing and the other is talking about design frameworks. If we take a look at the professional experience, we can see here that you've got small dot points of stuff you've done. And let's have a look at some of these. So we've got design and builds fast browser compatible websites with the latest web technologies. So this is a very generic statement. It doesn't really tell me a project you've worked on, how you've achieved it, or what technologies you've used. So in this case, I would say a much better description would be saying I've installed Angular for a project that does this, that is browser compatible with IE version 11 and upwards. This way you're using more specific use case examples that carry across the message that you designed something that's browser compatible with a certain architecture. I suppose that covers most of it. In terms of design, I probably would stick to a more basic color scheme. The dark orange here doesn't have a good effect in terms of making this design look a little bit aged. If you use brighter, younger colors, I suppose they would come across a little bit better, such as blues are very good in programming, as well as dark reds and maybe dark greens. I hope you liked this video. If you did, leave a thumbs up and subscribe. Otherwise, if you want a design or even a resume reviewed, jump into my Discord. I'll link it below and just submit it on there, and I'll have a look at it in the next video. Thanks for watching.